Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. Recent terrorist attacks have shaken the world. In Paris, on Friday, November 13th, ISIS carried out 7 coordinated terror attacks, killing 130 people. Just a day earlier, 2 suicide bombers killed 43 people in Beirut. And since then, violent attacks have occurred in Nigeria and Mali, claiming many lives. Muslim leaders have condemned these horrific acts. Unfortunately, though, these attacks have resulted in backlash right here in Canada. A spike in hate crimes and racist remarks towards Muslim Canadians have put police and the Muslim community on alert. Should Muslims be expected to apologize for the acts of ISIS? What are the root causes of the rise of ISIS? Joining me is Dr. Shabir Ally to help us answer some of these questions. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So we've been hearing a lot about recent terrorist attacks. Some of them have been claimed by ISIS in Paris, Beirut, and then there have been others in Nigeria and Mali. What are your initial thoughts, I guess, when you're thinking about all of this?
Well, when this happens, the first thought is, here we go again. It's terrible. The use of Islam and the message of Islam and Islamic terminology and words to justify attacking civilians is terrible. First of all, it's wrong to kill civilians or to target civilians deliberately. And second, to use the name of Islam, which is supposed to be a religion of peace, to justify such actions is just compounding the crime.
Now, how does ISIS do that? Because they do, I know in their title they call themselves the Islamic State. On what grounds do they justify themselves from an Islamic perspective?
Well, this will be up to them to articulate it more fully, but some of the analysis that might be offered in this respect would point to their understanding that they're at war with everybody else. It's not only non-Muslims, by the way, but even with other Muslims who do not agree with their particular extremist and radical interpretation of Islam. Some of their interpretations actually go back to some classical features of Islamic thought, and but they have distorted it all the more, making it as ugly as it now appears. They may suppose that the world is against Islam and Muslims, and that plunges them into like a perpetual war with the rest of the world. Some of the classical thinkers had put the Islamic world in contradistinction with the rest of the world in saying that there is a Darul Islam and Darul Harb, the world of Islam and the world of war, which is literally what they said. But nowadays we can see that classification, though appropriate perhaps for the time in which it was first coined, it does not really fit our present world. What we have now is a third category, the Dar al-Ahd, or the land of covenant, places in which, due to existing covenants, Muslims can live in peace and harmony with other people, and Muslims are safe to do so. This was not so at one time when Muslim scholars first thought about the possibility of Muslims living in non-Muslim lands. They actually feared for the safety of Muslims. So they said perhaps that if you have a reason to go there, you go, you do what you have to do, and you come back to the Muslim land, because it was not safe for Muslims to live elsewhere.
So if we can generally agree that the West and the lands that we live in are safe, there have been a lot of articles recently, especially talking about French youth who are going to Syria, joining ISIS and other terrorist organizations. So what are some of the root causes, and we've heard about that here in Canada as well, so what are some of the root causes of youth radicalization that we're seeing?
I hesitate to dwell too much on root causes, because when we do that, some people may get the idea that we're kind of justifying the actions. The actions are terrible as they are, and we don't want to encourage such actions. We don't want to say anything that would further spur some of the youth to perpetrate such crimes in the future, to make them feel that, oh yeah, there is something that legitimately drives us forward. So I should say from the start that there is no legitimacy to this. If we look at some of what we might refer to as root causes, it's only from the point of view of prevention, of us identifying the things that we need to work on. But we cannot make the argument that, oh, other people are fighting against us, and therefore we have the reason now to fight back. Civilians are not fighting against you. They could be in a particular part of the world, an Islamic state, or a state that claims itself to be Islamic, not even a state, but a group that claims itself to be a state. So, you know, you have a claim upon a claim, a group that claims itself to be a state, and then that group further claims that it's an Islamic state, not just any state. And that group is now, obviously, due to its atrocities, has invited other powers to come in and battle with them to deal with their atrocities. So this is a very different situation than the situation which Muslims first faced when they thought about Islam entering, or Muslims entering into the arena of war. But having said all of that, the root causes then, as we might try to identify them, one of them is that the youth in France have for a long time felt disenfranchised. With France introducing a hijab ban, for example, that makes Muslims more generally feel alienated in their own society. You think of people who are born in France, they're French as far as they know, they speak the language, that's their land, and yet they feel that they're not welcome as they are as Muslims.
So should, understanding all of that, taking it all into context, should Muslims be held responsible to apologize for all of these terrorist acts that are happening?
Well, when a Muslim woman was attacked when she went to pick up her children at a school in the Toronto area, her hijab was pulled and she was punched by these assailants. Our mayor, John Tory, made a public statement saying that this does not reflect Toronto. This is not what Toronto and Torontonians are about. So what was he doing? He's clarifying for the public that this is not us. So Muslims need to do that as well, to clarify for the public that these people who claim to be Muslims and are performing acts in the name of Islam do not represent us. Their ideology is distorted. That is not the Islam that we know and that we practice.
So Dr. Shabir, what would you say to someone who says, we had the incident with Dylan Roof where he went into a church and shot African Americans, and he was a white male Christian, and you didn't see the Christian community coming out and calling out and saying he doesn't represent us. So why does a Muslim law-abiding citizen have to feel like they have to apologize?
Well, I would be surprised if no Christians said that what this person did was wrong.
Well, I mean, it doesn't come out as a, the Christian community in XYZ is coming out and condemning these acts.
The difference may be that people do not understand what Islam and Muslims are. Who we are and what we stand for. And when they hear about such horrific attacks done in the name of Islam, with such an overtly Islamic appearance, that people with Islamic attire, Islamic appearance, using slogans and words from Islamic tradition, committing the acts, and they do claim that they're doing so in the name of Islam. They say that this is what being a Muslim entails. So there is already that claim, and now there needs to be the counterclaim, because if you don't make the counterclaim, that remains the claim that stands and that remains in the minds of people.
So one of the major issues that I want to focus on is, while we are having these counterclaims coming out, the Canadian Council of Muslims, recently spoke out against the crimes that were committed in Paris. You still have a lot of religious intolerance, and you mentioned the woman in Toronto whose headscarf was removed. There was an individual at U of T, he was spat on. There have been cases on the TTC and the GO. How do we sort of help change the narrative here and reinforce a positive religious tolerance in our communities?
It's important that Muslims should reach out to people of other faiths or people of no faith to have discussions about this, to help people to understand what Islam is. And more such statements need to be made, as you have just mentioned. Let me add here that the Canadian Council of Imams has put out a public statement, and this can be viewed on their website, CanadianCouncilofImams.com, in which they utterly and unequivocally condemn the actions of ISIS.
One of the other issues that I want to talk about that has been in the media a lot now is the issue of Syrian refugees. So Premier in Saskatchewan actually publicly said that, you know, our Prime Minister should halt or slow down the process of Syrian refugees coming in. There have been U.S. governors in the United States that have, you know, said they won't accept Syrian refugees for fear that, you know, it might cause backlash from ISIS once again and result in such attacks. What responsibility do we have to the Syrian refugees that are fleeing ISIS?
There is, of course, to add to that, the fear that through the refugee process that some extremists may slip through the cracks under the guise of claiming refugee status, and such an extremist on U.S. or Canadian soil could come back to launch attacks on the very soil that welcomed them as refugees at one time. But I think that such fears are unfounded given the massive problem that we're dealing with. We need to focus on the humanitarian aid that has become necessary. The Syrians who are coming and seeking refugee status are largely people who are themselves victims of violence in their country. And if they wanted to be terrorists and extremists, they would go join the terrorist and extremist group rather than
find
be fleeing,
easier ways, right?
As we are seeing them doing now. And naturally, there will be a screening process. People do not automatically get to come to these countries. They are screened, and people who are deemed to be harmless would be given the status. But you cannot guard against every such future possibility. I mean, you have a normal immigration process, and that process can allow some people to slip through the cracks that you don't know about, but you can't say that we will halt immigration altogether. You cannot have a policy that is overtly discriminatory against another people or another group. You have to enact policies that are fair and safe and equitable. And it is true that some of our fair and safe and equitable policies might be misused and abused by others, but we cannot cite such possible feared abuse as a reason for excluding a whole category of people, because now if we do it that way, then our own bigotry and prejudice and bias becomes the issue to deal with.
So how can we, change the narrative and sort of promote or, discredit what ISIS is saying and their message that, Islam is at war, like the West is not welcoming to Muslims and Islam, and this is why everything's happening. How do we combat that?
Well, we should point out that, in fact, our experience living in the West shows us that people are, in fact, supportive of Muslims so long as Muslims are peaceful and are not any threat to the lands in which they live. In fact, they didn't lay that condition. They just welcome Muslims as we are. It is only the actions of people like those who represent ISIS that makes their actions make this a question in the minds of people. Are Muslims really safe to have around? And our answer to that should be a resounding yes. Muslims are safe to be around. And ISIS is definitely wrong by misquoting the Quran, misusing examples from the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, misusing some classical Islamic pronouncements, and putting all of these things in a context in which they do not fit. It's like a square peg in a round hole. We can see that they are trying to force fit things. They're quite misguided, and the Quran, the life example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and our classical Muslim jurists would not support the kinds of atrocities which ISIS is perpetrating.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.